Good morning, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Lauren Stewart. I'm the naturalist at Maumee Bay State Park, and today we have an awesome topic for our webinar. It is yardscaping, and right now is the perfect time to start yardscaping. And so today we have with us Jenny Richards from Shawnee State Park, and she's going to be telling us about what you can do to bring nature into your yard. Now, if you do have questions for Jenny as we're doing the presentation, you'll see that you'll have a Q&A box. Please feel free to type those questions there and we'll be answering them for you. But without further ado, I'm going to go on to Naturalist Jenny.
Hello, everyone. It's so great to be here with you. Like Lauren said, I'm Jenny from Shawnee, and Shawnee is one of the most biologically diverse places in Ohio. I'm here today to share a few tips on how you can enhance your own backyard using native plants to increase bird encounters and support biodiversity. So let's start with the most notable bird in North America, the northern cardinal. So stunning with its bright red crest and plumage that 7 states have included it as named it their state bird, including Ohio. This is a bird that I think is the first bird that I can ever remember being able to identify as a child. So it's one that I think most people know. They inspire us to stalk them, which is what I've been doing this spring, to listen quietly for their songs, and even to paint them. A really close friend came to visit Shawnee to look at birds. Kelly Rossetti is her name. And I took her out and we got some really great looks at a hooded warbler. And the next thing I knew, she sent me a beautiful painting of a hooded warbler that she saw in Shawnee. This is probably the most common wood warbler that visits Shawnee and nests here. Some of us have even gone so far as to dress up like them, like this crazy naturalist, or to lie quietly in black, dressed in black on a March night in a field in hopes that a timberdoodle will land next to our heads and begin its courtship song. Or even to sit on the porch roof next to the hummingbird feeder with floral tubes between our toes to feel the wing beats of tiny ruby-throated hummingbirds. Yes, it's true. I love birds, and I've gone to great extremes to be near them. I even named both of my children after birds, wren and hawk. We love birds for their fascinating behaviors, like flight and song and migration. So we put up feeders to enjoy them in our own backyards. Look at this beautiful photo of the cardinal and the chickadee and the beautiful finch and the titmouse all flying off from a feeder. A lot of these photos that I'm using are from a great friend of mine. His name's John Howard. He's a local naturalist and he just takes great photos. But what if we went a step beyond putting up feeders and started planting native trees that support bird biodiversity? We could cut our lawns in half and plant an oak tree, which supports over 500 varieties of caterpillars, not to mention providing acorns for birds like blue jays and red-headed woodpeckers. Wow, oaks are great, and they do feed a lot of different types of wildlife. Also, we could leave up snags in our yards as well, which is dead trees that provide insects that eat the wood. We could plant wild black cherry trees, providing beautiful spring blooms and summer fruit. These trees are host plants for countless caterpillars, including the forest tent caterpillar, which you can see this Baltimore oriole gobbling up the tent caterpillar right there in my backyard. I watched this. There was a flock of orioles and they were in the cherry tree, and I noticed that they were all on the big tent that is the tent caterpillars, and I got my binoculars out and started looking closely, and there aren't many birds that can eat these spiny, pokey little caterpillars, but the Baltimore oriole was actually breaking them apart and then sticking its beak in the center and sucking out the juicy middle. So that was really cool to see. And also these cherries, when they're ripe, are actually really delicious. I just got my first delicious ones a couple years ago. I kept wondering, why do people keep saying these are edible? And I got them when they had this beautiful shiny sheen on them and they were nice and black, and they were so good. Under those large oaks and cherries, we could plant some understory trees like winged sumac and staghorn sumac, which is why I saw a red-banded hairstreak in my backyard this year. The caterpillars of this lovely butterfly eat decaying leaves under these trees. They're also give your yard this really tropical feeling with their foliage that's just all dissected, and I always feel like I'm in the tropics when I'm under my sumac trees. And in the summer, when these berries come on, after the red berries comes this white gelatinous coat that covers the berries that's got oxalic acid in it, and you can take those berries and cut them off, put them in a bucket, rub off the white gelatinous goo, and then strain that and add sugar, and it makes this wonderful red sumac lemonade. And I'm not encouraging you to drink poison sumac lemonade. Actually, poison sumac has white berries, and the non-poisonous varieties have red berries. Poisonous sumac is really rare in Ohio as well. And they'll also bring woodpeckers to your yard in the winter to forage for berries. Woodpeckers love to get on my staghorn sumacs in the winter, so I see a lot of pileated woodpeckers in the winter time eating those. And also leaving the snags, like I said earlier. Look at this pileated woodpecker build a nest in a dead tree in the backyard, and it's feeding its young. But they also really love poison ivy berries. So poison ivy is a native plant, and if you leave it grow up in a tree, it's going to create some edgy feeling and food for wildlife. And the only way that you're going to get the poison ivy is when you're trying to pull it. Pawpaw trees also provide a tropical feeling and provide delicious custard apple fruit. And it's a lovely flower. This beautiful red colored flower that's an early spring blooming flower, and it's the host plant of the zebra swallowtail. So look at those beauties right there. Who doesn't want to see zebra swallowtails flying around their yard in the spring and summer? Another great plant to provide a layered look in a place for caterpillars to pupate is the spicebush shrub, which is a host plant of the spicebush swallowtail. The berries are used as a substitute for allspice, and the twigs can be used to brew tea. Now, one reason that we want to create a layered look in our yard is not only because it's beautiful. We've got these towering trees, and then underneath we got some understory shrubs, and we can even go another step and add some spring ephemerals. But a lot of caterpillars that are eating the leaves of the trees will pupate in the ground, in the soil below the trees. And most suburban and urban landscapes, we mow right up next to our trees, and that does not allow caterpillars a safe place to fall from the tree and burrow into the ground and pupate to overwinter as a pupa. So we need to actually expand out and make layers under our trees. That's really important. Now that you've created your shade, and you can plant some of the wonderful early spring ephemerals, which will draw in caterpillars to feed the birds, and for your enjoyment, like wild ginger. It's a host plant for one of our most magnificent butterflies, the pipevine swallowtail. Look at that. Pipevine swallowtails, when they open their wings, the tops of their wings are this like iridescent blue. And you can tell them apart from the spicebush swallowtail because they only have one row of orange dots, where spicebush have 2 rows of orange dots underneath the wings. Violets, they come in an array of colors, and they're the host plants of fritillaries, like this great spangled fritillary in the picture here. The fritillary female actually lays her eggs on the ground in the fall, and they overwinter as caterpillars. In the spring, the violets will emerge, and then so do the fritillary caterpillars awaken and find their way to a patch of beautiful violets and start eating the leaves, and then they become a beautiful, great spangled fritillary. Now, not only can these caterpillars eat violets, but we can too. I have a great friend who makes wonderful violet jelly, and the leaves are loaded with vitamin C and look great in a salad. And I don't know about you, but I love foraging in my backyard. I like eating some things from the wild, but I like it best when I do it from my own backyard rather than taking it from wild spaces, because there are very few wild spaces left in the world because, you know, humans are filling up the space. So it's nice to, if you're going to forage, put those things that you want to eat right in your own backyard. Now we have some native plants. Let's enhance our habitat. Let's create some edge and some cover. Now this is my yard, this picture on the left. It doesn't look very fabulous, but you have no idea how many animals I see going in and out of these brush piles. A long time ago, I used to burn my brush. I would make these giant bonfires, and I had so much fun doing that. I was a young girl, and I just loved watching these big fires. But then I realized that if I took all this brush from my fruit tree prunings, any tree that I had to remove for some reason, and I piled that up, and you can do that neatly. You can have an area in your yard that is just meant for that. I could create so much habitat for small mammals, lizards, and birds. Every time I go out to my front yard, this thing is just covered in birds that are eating the broken down wood and not the wood, but the insects that are eating the broken down wood. And then also I've seen chipmunks run in there. I've seen baby bunnies run in there. I've seen all sorts of animals using this habitat pile. I have 3 of them. And after time goes by and I feel like I've had enough of that, and at the right time of year, I will actually mulch some of that up and use that in my gardens instead of burning it, which was really kind of wasteful. You can also, if you're not into piling twigs and having a brush pile, you can just allow some of the native plants to create edge for you, like this picture on the right, which is also my yard, of black haw, which is a native shrub, and it's very edgy. And if you have these edgy areas, you attract these handsome birds like the eastern towhee that sings to you, "Drink your tea." And that's really nice, to be on the porch having a cup of tea and listening to your towhees singing their little hearts out. I planted several American hazelnuts in my yard from a nut. About 10 years ago, I took a nut, I stuck my heel in the ground, I planted these beautiful hazelnuts. Now, it doesn't have to become a wild, crazy shrub, but I tend to let things be wild and crazy in my yard. I like it like that. And I understand that's not for everyone, but it is for me. And since I planted those hazelnut shrubs in my yard, on one shrub last year, I harvested 50 pounds of nuts. And I've shared them with my friends. I share them for people to plant as well as eat. And the hazelnut is one of the first things to bloom. You can see on the bottom left, there's a beautiful hazelnut flower with those little red hairs. And you can see right next to that is some of my harvest. That's a basket of black walnuts. There's the hazelnuts. Some of the hazelnuts are right behind the black walnuts. And on the right, there's actually butternuts and hickory nuts, which I also love to harvest from my yard and eat. So you can feed yourself and you can feed the wildlife at the same time. That big, beautiful, juicy polyphemus moth there attracts so many birds to that hazelnut shrub. It has a host plant for many other caterpillars as well, but those shrubs are just really attracting a lot of birds coming into my yard. I don't have a large body of water close by, but this year I got to watch a Louisiana water thrush coming to this hazelnut shrub over and over and over. There's a stream down at the bottom of the hill. I live on a ridge, but there's a stream at the bottom, and the Louisiana water thrush was coming and foraging right in my hazelnut shrub. So it was a gift that keeps on giving. Another edgy plant is trumpet honeysuckle, which is a native honeysuckle, and it's great for attracting the snowberry clearwing caterpillars, and the moths are equally as beautiful. And did I mention that this plant started blooming in the middle or early April, and it will bloom all through the summer. And it's covered in hummingbirds as well. I've got hummingbirds all over this plant. I put out one feeder and they just ignore my feeder and they just love this. Also, I have besides trumpet honeysuckle, I also planted trumpet creeper, which is more of just a summer blooming, long tubular red plant that really attracts hummingbirds as well. Some other really showy red flowers are the cardinal flower and fire pink. And cardinal flower does really well if you've got a wet area in your yard, and fire pink does well in the shade. So now you have created, this great yardscape, and let's complete our yardscape ecosystem by adding a water feature. Maybe you have a small yard and you can just put something very small in, maybe even just a bird bath. But I have a vernal pool in my backyard, and it's a great vernal pool. And I have been fighting this wet ditch in my front yard for years. I've been fighting this, adding rocks, filling it in. And finally I decided to just stop fighting this wet ditch and just dig it out a little more. So I created this very long wet ditch that's on the side of between my garden. There's a walkway that goes out between my garden and my driveway. And that first year, the very first year I put in this long wet ditch, I got gray tree frogs, which that's the hatchling, a little baby tree frog from last year. I got American toads singing there, green frogs, and mountain chorus frogs, which are really cool. They're all using the vernal pool, and it's just wonderful to see all that wildlife right out my front door. And I planted elderberries on one end in hopes that I'll get a nice patch of elderberry, which likes wet feet. And I'm going to make elderberry syrup, which is a great immune system builder. So hopefully they're doing very well. In 1 year, I planted these little elderberry sticks, and they're doing so well. I also used the wet area to plant things like cardinal flower. I've got Jerusalem artichoke growing there. I've got all sorts of beautiful water-loving plants now growing in this wetland area. It's not really a wetland, it's too small to be that. It's more like a long wet ditch that it's also considered a vernal pool because it does dry up. I planted rose mallow on the other end of where the elderberries aren't, and I saw my first common checkered skipper last fall. I knew it was something different, so I ran inside, I got my butterfly book, and lo and behold, it feeds on mallow. So here I am, I'm bringing these things to my yard that wouldn't normally grow there, and it's attracting new animals that I am getting to enjoy and learn about. I'm having so much fun with it. I've been doing it for quite a while now, but it's just a really good time to see what you can get to visit your yard. And if you have space for a larger pond, you may even attract the lovely RedWinged Blackbird, which enjoys nesting in cattails. And I love the songs of these. I had a big flock of them in my yard early this year, but they'd usually just move right on to a place that's got a larger wetland area. Now, you may want to consider letting another portion of your lawn go. And if you do, you can convert it to meadow. Mother Nature's meadows are so colorful and so beautiful. Two of these pictures are just pictures of meadows close by my house. Like I was saying, I live in the Shawnee Forest, which is like the largest state forest in Ohio, and my property actually happens to be right on the edge of Appalachia Preserve as well. You can walk from my house and beyond the Shawnee Forest or at the edge of Appalachia Preserve. And there's so many gorgeous meadows. Mother Nature's example is a great example to follow. The meadow on the left there is New England aster with a bunch of beautiful varieties of goldenrod behind. And then next to that, we've got some downy wood mint and some black-eyed Susans, and there's a lot of boneset. And these are just really close to my house. And I've been wanting to turn a piece of my yard into meadow for a long time, and so I did that. I made friends with a really neat lady named Gail Martin, and she has a place called Natives in Harmony, and we buy some of our plants for the park. Shawnee we went native years ago. We took all of the non-native plants out of our flower beds and we just started planting native plants in our flower beds. And I started doing that at my house too, and even have had her to a couple of events where she has her native plants for sale there at the park, which is really neat. And these two pictures, these other pictures, the one with the bee boxes in the back, that's my native plant meadow, and the one on the bottom there, it's got rattlesnake master, purple coneflower, prairie coneflower, purple milkweed, lots and lots of different varieties of things. And the top right, that's gray-headed coneflower. You can actually eat the foliage of that plant. So adding that color, I mean, I don't know how anyone could think that looked too wild, because to me it looks magical. I love it so much. I just want to make it go on and on. I don't want to mow anything anymore. That is my goal for my yard, is to stop mowing altogether besides paths through the wildflowers and trees. And when you plant these meadows, you begin to see beautiful birds like the common yellowthroat, which eats spiders and beetles and seeds of native grasses. It says, witchetty, 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 witchetty. Or the eastern bluebird, this beautiful bluebird with a spider in his beak there. That picture was taken right in the park. We have a bluebird trail, and we have so many bluebirds in Shawnee. It's just awesome. Another great idea is to put up nest boxes, and the Division of Wildlife has a great little free pamphlet on how to build nest boxes. So that's a fun thing to do with your family. You can get that book and you can build nest boxes with your kids, or maybe you don't have kids and you can build them just with your friends, and install nest boxes in the right places, and you will attract a lot of nesting birds right to those boxes, like chickadees and house wrens and bluebirds and other cavity nesters, the owls. You may even attract an owl to nest in a cavity box. My children love to check our bluebird boxes in our yard. They love to see the eggs, and they're so beautiful and blue. You may attract the indigo bunting, which is oftentimes in edgy places where there are lawns, and they eat seeds of native plants and vegetation. They get beetles, flies, weevils, and other larvae. Look at that lovely bird. Or the eastern phoebe, who returns to the same nesting spot year after year to raise their young, building a nest of grasses and mud on outbuildings, under bridges, and under your eaves. They have really high nest fidelity and mate fidelity. They return to the same place, so you get to see your same phoebes year after year and welcome them home, because even though they migrate south, this is their home. This is where they raise their young. And just think if you could make your yard home to a great diversity of plants and animals. Your meadow can have all your favorite native flowers and all your favorite colors. You can choose from Ohio's 13 varieties of milkweed species. This is common milkweed, just covered in little skippers. And I have about an acre of common milkweed in my meadow, and I can't even count the number of monarchs that I see in my yard munching on my milkweed. It's just amazing to see them. We actually have a monarch monitoring program in Shawnee, and we do it at Chaparral Prairie every fall. So we put a little sticker on the hind wing of the monarch. They fly to Mexico, to the Yucatan Peninsula. We had a recapture a few years back, so that was really cool. That flew from Chaparral Prairie in southern Ohio all the way to Mexico. Joe Pye weed is a butterfly magnet and looks great in a meadow. With all its tall stature and large branching clusters of crown-shaped flowers, it's often referred to as the queen of the meadow. And just look at it. And there's quite a few varieties of Joe Pye weed that bloom in Ohio as well. This one's covered in tiger swallowtails. I can't get enough of it. I just think it's the most beautiful thing in the world to use native plants and attract native animals. And then you also begin developing this intimate relationship with the plants and the animals and seeing how they interact and who uses what. And it's very cool. So now you've got your meadow and you have some things to keep in mind, like when's the best time to mow the meadow to ensure all animals are safe from the cut. This is a map that I found online from this Farm Service Agency, and it shows when it's safe to mow to avoid the grassland birds. But in my yard, I don't have any grassland birds nesting in my yard that are nesting in the grasses. And I took a wildlife class in college, and they taught us there that in our region, it's okay to mow in late June. By then, all the baby bunnies have gone, and everything that's nesting there is gone. And if you mow in late June in this area, all of those flowers that usually grow in the meadow are the taller, larger flowers, and they are summer plants. Meadows usually are in full bloom in the summer, and if you do that in June, they still have plenty of time to grow up and to bloom, and you'll get to see them all through August, September, October, and then to leave those plants up all winter long is really important. Through migration, birds stop by to glean on seeds and insects that are in there, and a lot of wildlife like to hide out in that tall grasses and flowers that are there that you leave as cover to take care of them over winter. This may seem a bit overwhelming or maybe just too wild for your neighborhood, but the National Wildlife Federation has a site that you can visit to certify your native yardscape and show others in your neighborhood what you're doing. Make it look intentional with a sign. You can use fences to contain things and do things on a small scale. It doesn't have to be a large scale planting or even just potted plants. Every plant counts because our broken landscape needs everyone to buy into this so that every yard has things for pollinators and birds. We just really all need to support biodiversity. It's just what needs to happen. Many years ago, at the Botanical Symposium, Doug Tallamy gave an inspiring talk on using natives. I learned that oak trees support over 550 species of caterpillars, and that caterpillars are the most important food source for nesting birds. I also learned that we have 40 million acres of mowed lawns in the United States, which is one of the most sterile landscapes of all, just next to concrete. I was inspired. I continue to be inspired by Doug. I've heard him speak 3 times since then, and I follow him. He continues to inspire people around the world with his work. Please take the time to check out his great solution to our diminishing insect and bird populations called Homegrown National Parks. Doug makes a good point that if we create little parks in our yards, we no longer have to wait in long lines to get in. Make a reservation or even share the space with others. We can again gain an intimate relationship with nature. If you search Nature's Best Hope, you'll find countless videos of Doug talking about the benefits of using natives in your yard. Now, Doug is an entomology professor and ecology professor. He knows way more than I do, and his talks are amazing because he's also a photographer. And he has created in his own yard 20 years ago. He got 10 acres. It was all covered with non-native invasive things. He had to beat his way through it to create, this wonderful yard that he has now. And I really encourage you to go look up Doug Tallamy and watch he's given presentations for the Smithsonian, for the for the NWF, for all sorts of organizations. So he's out there. You've got to watch one of his webinars. It will change your life. And it will inspire you the same way that it has inspired me. I tease that I get people to come to the park to do a program with me, and I have the same theme for every program, no matter what I call it, and that is, love your mother and create this space in your own yard that can support biodiversity. Now, here are some great resources for learning more about how you can make a difference. Enhancing your own backyard with native plants greatly increases bird watching opportunities while providing valuable and much needed habitat that supports biodiversity. So I have a lot of books that I use, and they're great resources. One of them is Caterpillars of Eastern North America by David Wagner. What I like about this book is it shows these great caterpillars, tells you what they turn into, and then tells you also their host plant. So you can look through this book and you can decide what you want to see and then plant the plants that will attract that thing to your yard. I love that. I didn't write this down, But I love Butterflies of Ohio. This is a great book by Jarrett Daniels, and it's really, really helpful to me. And when I find something new, it tells me what it's eating on and all that stuff. So I like this book a lot too. Birds of Ohio by Jim McCormick. Use this all the time. Tells little stories about the life history of the birds, what they need, how you can tell one from another. This is a really good book filled with lots of great information. So I use this book, although I have a library that goes to the ceiling. These are some of my favorites. I didn't add this one either, but I like this book for my region. This is The Wildflowers of Tennessee, the Ohio Valley, and the Southern Appalachians. This is a good book because it tells great little stories, little naturalist stories in the book. And then Bringing Nature Home is a book that Doug wrote. He's written several. How native plants sustain wildlife in our gardens, and a newer book, Nature's Best Hope, a new approach to conservation that starts in your yard. I suggest looking those books up and listening to Doug speak. Also, not every plant, even though native, is created equal. Some are keystone species, like I was mentioning the oak trees, which support over 500 varieties of caterpillars, which are really important to breeding birds. And cherry trees are the next, most important. If you don't know what to plant, National Wildlife Federation has a really cool website. It's called the Native Plant Finder. You can put in your zip code and find the keystone species in your area that you should plant. And it is hard to find native plants. So I have put up a few resources of some of the places that I use to find and buy native plants. Natives in Harmony, I already mentioned. It's in Marengo, Ohio. Leaves for Wildlife is in Sunbury, I think. And then Riverside Native Trees is in Delaware. So all these places are great resources for finding native plants, and I strongly suggest doing this in your yard. Now, I found an article from the Smithsonian Magazine, an April 2020 article about Doug Tallamy, and here's some eight steps to rewild America. And he says, shrink your lawns. He recommends having the area devoted to lawn in the continental United States, reducing water, pesticides, and fertilizer use. Replace grass with plants that sustain more animal life. And I think I've said a lot of these things because like I said, I'm inspired by Doug. I'm kind of one of his groupies. Remove invasive plants. I have 30 acres on the edge of Shawnee, and I have invasives that I deal with every year, and I just don't get overwhelmed by it. I just take a little section and I remove that section, and I do this every year. I have autumn olive at my house. I have I have one bush honeysuckle that I've got to get out of there. Some of the bad ones, Japanese honeysuckle, I have that. It's the worst, and it'll just take over. And what it does is creates a monoculture, and that is exactly what we do not want. Biodiversity is the life force of all of us. We need it to survive. So the more varieties of native plants, the better. He says create no-mow zones, like I was talking about when we put in a big tree, and then we have some understory trees, and then we have some spring ephemerals under that, and that gives the caterpillars a chance to drop down and actually pupate in the ground. He says, this is another great point that I didn't bring up, is that lights at night, it really confuses insects, it blinds them. So if you don't want to take out your light, fine, put in a motion sensor, and then it only comes on when it needs to be on. Or he even suggests putting in LED lights or yellow lights that don't do near as much damage to insects that fly around or attracted to light at night. Plant keystone species, which is something that I just talked about. Welcome pollinators, goldenrods, native willows, asters. This is something that I talked about with the meadow, welcoming pollinators. It says fight mosquitoes with bacteria. So, we spray our neighborhoods for mosquitoes, and avoiding harsh chemicals is really, really important because chemicals are not good for insects, and some of them kill all insects instead of just specific ones. So I would like to leave you with my favorite poem, and then we'll go to questions. I think we'll have time for that. I'm going to read you a poem that really speaks to me, and I feel like it was written for me, although I know it wasn't. My work is loving the world. Here the sunflower, there the hummingbird, equal seekers of sweetness. Here the quickening yeast, there the blue plums. Here the clam deep in the speckled sand. Are my boots old? Is my coat torn? Am I no longer young and still not half perfect? Let me keep my mind on what matters, which is my work, which is mostly standing still and learning to be astonished. The Phoebe, the delphinium, the sheep in the pasture, and the pasture, which is mostly rejoicing since all ingredients are here, which is gratitude to be given a mind and a heart and those body clothes, a mouth with which to give shouts of joy to the moth and the wren, to the sleepy, dug-up clam, telling them all over and over, how is it that we live forever? That's all I have, and I hope that you are all inspired and that you will all think of planting natives in your own backyards.
Thank you so much, Jenny. We actually have a couple questions for you. One of them was, are buckthorns good plants for your yard?
Well, they're native. The buckthorns grow here in Shawnee, so native plants are good. But like I was saying earlier, keystone species, planting those keystone species.
Perfect. And we do have another question from Spooky. Do caterpillars of these butterflies that you're talking about damage typical vegetable garden plants, or do they pretty much stick to the native forms?
Well, a lot of caterpillars, not all, are specialists. So they will stick to one plant, a lot of them. And even some bees are like this. They just, pollinate one plant. Everything has a very intimate relationship. So if no, they do not attack your gardens, although there are some of those awesome sphinx moth caterpillars like the tomato hornworm that will eat your tomatoes, but I suggest adding more tomatoes because then you get to see these awesome sphinx moth caterpillars flying around your place at night. Or not, the caterpillars don't fly, the moths do.
And the caterpillars are pretty cool looking too.
Yes, they're awesome. They have a relationship with parasitic wasps. Like, there's just amazing. All these different connections are so cool. The oak trees, the acorns attract these weevils, and the weevils eat out the middle, and then they make a home for ants that move in, and then it's just all connected. So it's so important that we really support all of that biodiversity.
And I actually have a question for you. This is for me. So if you could pick of all the plants, if you could only pick, like, say you're starting really small and you had one plant that you would want to plant for sure, what would be the plant that you would get?
I would pick an oak tree. I would pick an oak. Now, some people say, oh, oaks don't grow fast enough. They grow so slowly. But watch Doug's talk. Watch Doug Tallamy's talk. He planted an oak tree 20 years ago. It's pretty tall now, but he's counted over 500 varieties of caterpillars on that oak tree, that one oak tree. Like I said, when he bought his place 20 years ago, it was mostly invasive species, and he just started planting it and making it wild. You will be so inspired when you watch one of Doug's talks. And oaks support the most diversity of caterpillars, and caterpillars are the most important food source because they're all soft. They don't have any hard parts to contend with. And then so these birds can just shove them down their little nestlings' throats without worrying about hurting their baby birds.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Jenny. And thank you everyone for joining us today. I know I learned some wonderful things today, and planting those native plants, I can tell you, really does make a world of difference. Right now, especially, is a lot of our songbird migrations, and they depend on having native food sources. So if you can, please plant native. There's a whole ecosystem that you'll get to see with it. But on that note, we have a awesome webinar as well next week. If you come join us next week at 10 a.m., we're talking about hawks, so going up the food chain here. And for those of you who maybe only caught part of this, this this actual webinar will be posted on our Ohio DNR YouTube page in a couple of days. So if you didn't catch all of it or you want to rewatch it, check us out the YouTube page in a couple of days and you'll be able to rewatch it. So thank you guys so much for joining us. We hope you enjoy the rest of your day and hope you tune in next week to learn about hawks.